Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Kickstarter Weekly. This week's episode is going to cover games funding between December 20th and the 26th. And I'm only going to have one game to talk to you about today because December's been a pretty light month. I think people are just not launching their Kickstarters this month because it's just a lot. It's a lot to deal with during the holiday season. Now that means with less Kickstarters launching, I've had to spend less time on the website, Think Outside the Board, where I do a daily roundup column of all of the Kickstarters that have launched the previous day. There just haven't been as many launching this month. I'm anticipating that's going to happen in January as well. I'm not sure when publishers are going to start rolling their Kickstarters back. I mean, right now they've got the holiday season, and on top of that, they've got the pandemic, the global shipping crisis, and the kind of developing Omicron variant that may make people want to wait a little bit longer to start launching Kickstarters again. So I'm anticipating that it won't be until at least a few weeks into January before publishers really start rolling out Kickstarters again, which means that January is probably going to be a lighter month again for website work. Now, in December, I've actually had a lot of things going on. Some of that's related to the holiday, including this last week where my fiance and I both got our booster shots, and we had negative reactions that knocked us each out of being able to do things for a few days. We also have a puppy who is still under a year old. He requires a lot of time and effort, and we have to walk him and things like that. So each time one of us was down because we staggered our booster shots, it meant that the other one was really kind of having to take care of Wesley. So that really kind of affected my ability to produce any videos this week. But I'll talk more about what's coming for the website at the end of this video. Right now, I just briefly want to touch on the rest of the month going through into January and how that's going to affect site content. So now for the most part that I've kind of done a lot of the holiday things that I need to do apart from the actual holidays themselves, and we're kind of boosted and stuff like that, I think the next month I should be able to be fairly productive for videos and kind of do a lot of catching up work on videos that I've wanted to put out. And I'm going to talk at the end of this video in the What's Coming section specifically about those videos that'll be coming and also about plans for the next year. But I do want to tease one thing at the top, which is that I've been thinking about all of the Kickstarters that are going to be delivering next year and games that are going to be releasing. And I spent some time this week while I was not feeling well and I couldn't really produce video content to take a look at the games that are out there in 2022. And I made a list, and I've got a list of something like 140 games, at least, that I'm excited about. And I think I may do a video series on that around Christmas time and maybe call it the 12 days of games that are going to be premiering in 2022 next year. And I'll probably do that as a series of videos, and maybe in each video I'll talk about 10 different games, and I'll try to pare back my list to 120 games, and that way I can do kind of 12 quicker videos, and each one will cover 10 games, and there'll be the kind of 120 games, 12 videos of games coming next year. But if you're interested in that and other plans for the channel next year, stick around to the end of the video or just jump forward and you can go ahead and look at that and kind of see everything that's going to be happening. Now, before I talk about the one currently running Kickstarter that I'll be covering in this video, I am going to talk about the 5 different games that I played this last week. So first up is Alma Mater. That's a game that I've been wanting to play. I thought that the theme looked pretty interesting. It's a pretty heavy Euro that has to do with university professors and students, and essentially you're trying to create your own kind of school and hire out professors and get different students, and you're kind of getting them from this main board, this main university where all the professors are. Now, for some reason, when I started reading the rule book, I thought Alma Mater was going to be sort of a heavy game, and it is. But the more I kind of read the rule book, the more I saw that it's really just a worker placement game. And worker placement games are, for the most part, simple games when you break it down. I mean, even if they've got complicated things happening, they still, hang their hat on that structure of the worker placement, which is fairly easy, I think, for most people to understand. They really kind of just need to look at the board and figure out what the various worker placement locations do, and then from there you can go. Now, there are a lot of kind of rules and little kind of fiddly rules in Alma Mater that do make it a little more complex. There's a lot of iconography, there are things that kind of chain into other actions. And we played the 2-player game. I had my friend Ethan over on Friday, and the first thing we noticed while we were playing it is that there are 2 problems gameplay-wise from the start of the game. One is that money is pretty tight, and you need money to acquire a lot of things in the game. So you need to try to figure out a way to get money and develop a money engine. The other thing is that you need books, which is a resource in the game, to hire students and professors. And both of those resources, the money and the books, can be fairly prohibitive at the start of the game, at least for maybe the first half of the game. And I think both Ethan and I were a little bit worried. We wanted to, do efficient actions, and we were a little bit hesitant about spending so many actions to get a lot of books and a lot of money and just kind of throw away several rounds of the game doing that. But you really do need to find a way to get those things. And if you need to spend time to accumulate those resources and put off some of your bigger strategies, well, then that's what you have to do. Once we got into the game and our engines kind of started working, we both really enjoyed the game. I think if I had to rate it after one game, I'd probably rate the game around an 8.0. But we started to notice some problems in our 2-player game, which employs a dummy AI player. There are several spaces on the board that can get kind of tight, especially with that AI player blocking spaces, which is what he's supposed to do. But it becomes very prohibitive about the kinds of actions that you can do, to a fault, I think. And we noticed that in a 3-player game, you're using the same side of the board. I think in some ways it'll open up a little bit because you'll have another player kind of taking actions and you'll be able to engage with that player, and that'll help the flow of gameplay a little bit. But when that other player is taking actions, it's going to make the game even more congested because they're going to be placing out up to 6 workers where the AI player only placed 3. Now, if you flip the board over, which you only do for a 4-player game, in several locations you have double the number of spaces. And even though you're doubling the player count, I can tell from having played the game and kind of understanding the way the board works that there's going to be more room to maneuver in that 4-player version of the game. And I think it was very obvious to us that some of the design hiccups, I'd call them, in the 2 and 3-player version are not really going to be as present in the 4-player version. So I said to my friend Ethan that I really want to play this at 4 players. Unfortunately, I'm not really playing right now with 4 players. I have 2 to 3 different friends that come over periodically and we play 2-player games. I play 2-player games with my fiance. And then maybe once a month I do kind of a game day with my heavy gaming group. And right now we have 3 people, including me in that group. So I'm not really playing at the 4-player count. And, we looked on Board Game Geek and it said exactly what we thought, that 4 players is the best way to play that game. So I'm really excited to play Alma Mater at 4 players. I really, really like the game a lot, but I think it's going to really shine and not have some of those hiccups at 4. Unfortunately, I think it's going to be a little while before I can get the game played at 4. Also, because it is a 2020 game, it's some game that I was trying to get played for my 2020 game list. It's not a game that I need to get a lot of plays in to make a first impressions video. It's too old for me to be doing a first impressions video. So I don't think I'm going to be playing a lot more of it right now. I have to kind of move on to other games. There is a solo mode. I plan on playing the solo mode and checking that out. I may teach the game to my fiance Kristen, although I know some of the things that we had issues with in the game are going to drive her absolutely nuts. But if I do teach her the game, then the upside is when I have that game day, we could potentially play Alma Mater, have her join us, and we'd have 4 players. But it's a game that I really enjoyed. It's heavy Euro, and it's got a theme I don't think we see as much, this kind of scholastic setting. And it's just a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to play. I like the various mechanisms. They work together well. But there are a few kind of design flaws that I don't think should be as present in the 4-player version of the game. So that's where I'd like to play that game whenever possible. I also played Altar Quest, which is a game that I ended up deciding not to back when it was on Kickstarter. The reason for that, I think, is there were just a lot of other similar games up at the time, and I just made the decision not to back it. I think at that time, money may have been kind of tight as well. Anyway, my friend Ryan did back it. He's very excited about it, so he brought it over. We played it. It's another 2020 game, so it'll be present on my top games of 2020 when I do those videos. And I really liked it. It's up near the top of my 2020 game list. Essentially, it is a dungeon crawler. It's not deck building that you're using in it. Everyone kind of has different card sets, and you'll be using those card sets to play your characters. So it's not really deck building, but you are cycling through an individual deck. And it's just a great dungeon crawler, and the way that it deals with its cards and kind of the circumstances of its game and the combat, it's complex enough that there are a lot of good decisions happening and things for you to do and ways for you to do things that kind of pull off exciting moves. We were able many times in the game to kind of pull off some killer moves that we didn't necessarily think we'd be able to going into a combat. Yet at the same time, it doesn't feel super fiddly. There is a lot of fiddliness in the game, but everything is kind of purposeful. And so it just kind of ends up feeling very functional rather than fiddly, even though there's a lot of moving parts for it. Everything makes sense. Everything's kind of intuitive. And when there are, extra rules and things, it all makes sense as well. And it kind of comes together in a really nice way. Also, that game has kind of several different scenarios you can do. You can do it as part of a storyline. You can do it as one-offs. And there's different monsters that you can fight. And every time you do a scenario as a one-off, or if you're playing through a campaign, you're going to select the kinds of monsters in that dungeon from several different decks. I think there's half a dozen to a dozen kind of different decks. So you're going to always be combining different scenarios or campaigns with different monsters. And those two things together give you a lot of variability in what's happening. And then on top of that, there are going to be sometimes lurking monsters or wandering monsters that will just show up. And they are not the same kind of monsters that are the main monsters in the dungeon. So those lurking or wandering monsters are going to be coming from all of the different decks in the game. They'll be kind of a random assortment of monsters, which is really neat because you're going to be focusing on one sort of monster, but you'll be getting a taste of all of the different monsters in the game and kind of how they work. So there's just so much variability in that game. And games like that, dungeon crawlers with miniatures, a lot of it's dependent on the scenarios. And you run through a certain number of scenarios and you're kind of done. You've seen what the game has to offer. There are ways for them to mix it up and add some variability in. But the way that they've done this in Altar Quest, kind of mixing and matching scenarios and a campaign system with all these different kinds of enemies, there's a lot of variability. And unlike, I think, a lot of other dungeon crawlers where you spend a lot of money, you get a lot of boxes, and there's just so much glut, and then there's only so much you can do in the campaign, this really utilizes all of that stuff very well, so that I think if you were to someone to have backed the game or to acquired the game, you're going to be able to get a lot of gameplay out of it. It's not one of those games where you're going to be purchasing it, it's going to take up all this space, and then it's going to be, a similar experience every time. This is a game that you could pull out and mix it up and have a different experience every time. And it's a game that you could keep going back to without feeling that it runs stale. So for me, I think Altar Quest is sitting up in the 9s. And I think right now it's like in the top 5 of my 2020 games. I wasn't expecting it to be that high, but it is really, really good. It's so good that I think if it comes back to Kickstarter at some point with more expansions, I'm going to have to back it. It's so good, which means something else will need to move out, I think, to make room for kind of another big dungeon crawler in the house. But there you have it. The game is that good. I also played Nidavellir, and that game we played at a 3-player count. I played it with my fiancée Kristen and with Ryan. We played it, I think, before Ryan and I got into Altar Quest. A lot of people have been playing Nidavellir, so I think a lot of people know that one fairly well. It's at retail, it's fairly easy to get. I since then have acquired Thingvellir, but I didn't have it at the time, and we just wanted to play the base game anyway. So Nidavellir is essentially a bidding game and a card drafting game. So every round, the players are going to be bidding on cards in 3 different markets or taverns, and they're going to be doing that using a coin system. And within that coin system, there's also a way that they can upgrade coins. And the cards that they're going to be drafting, there are 5 different types of cards. It's kind of a set collection thing, but all of these sets score in different ways. So you're trying to get cards to increase the values of your sets, and you're doing that in part on what you already have and kind of what the other players are choosing. And then every time you get 1 card of each set and kind of make a row, you're allowed to take a special bonus card, and those cards have extra abilities that can really help you kind of build up your point scoring engine in yet other ways. Now, I enjoyed the game. Bidding games really aren't my forte, and if I'm going to be playing a game where I'm kind of drafting cards to score points at the end, even though I thought the system in Nidavellir was fun, I think I'd still rather play Fantasy Realms, which for me just is perfection for that genre. And the other problem with Nidavellir is that there's a lot of iconography. There's a lot of kind of special cards that when you look at them, if you haven't played before, you don't really know what they do. So I think if you're playing with people and teaching this game, it's not a hard game to teach. There's not a lot going on, but there's so many cards that are kind of exceptions that need to be explained that it's just a lot of information. It's a download of information. And for me, I don't think the game is really that good in the end to kind of merit having to sift through all that information for everybody who's playing it for the first time. It's just also not really my game anyway. So I'll play it again. I'd like to play it with the expansion, and it is a fun game on its own. And if you like these kinds of games, if you like a bidding game with card drafting, you're going to love it. There's a lot going on, especially if the differences on the cards don't bother you. And I think if you play with the same people a couple times and you kind of have a game group, everyone will learn the cards over time, and then you'll just be able to enjoy the game. But I know the Hungry Gamer, I think, rated it as one of his top 10 games of the year. For me, it's probably going to come in scoring around like a 6.5. So I plan on doing, my top 25 or 30 games of 2021, and I don't think it's going to even end up making my list. And if it does, it'll be near the bottom. It just kind of depends what else I still play. I have a bunch of 2021 games left to play to see if it makes it or not. But it was an okay game for me. It's a game I'll play again if somebody asks. Maybe I might want to play it on my own once or twice more this lifetime, but it's not a game I plan on keeping in my collection. I also played Role Player. My fiance and I actually played Role Player for the first time ever. And this is a very light, probably medium light dice drafting game where you are essentially creating a Dungeon and Dragon character. And you're going to roll 6 dice at the start, kind of plug it into a grid, and then the rest of the game is going to be comprised of rounds. It's 12 rounds in a 2-player game, because you're rolling 6 dice to start and you kind of have 18 dice slots. And then each of those 12 rounds, each player will be drafting a die, figuring out where to place it. Now, as you place dice, they activate various powers that allow you to kind of manipulate the dice in different ways. And then you'll also be drafting cards. The cards can do things like give you powers that let you kind of do things as you're doing things with the dice. There are also armor sets that kind of function as set collection. So the more you get of a set, the more points they'll score at the end of the game. There are traits, which are usually endgame scoring cards. So you'll pick a bunch of traits over the course of the game, and those will give you more ways to score points at the end of the game. And it's a really nice combination between the card play and the dice placement. I really don't like Sagrada. Sagrada is on one of my probably top 10 disliked games of all time because I feel like there's so little game in Sagrada. I'm just not a fan. But for me, Role Player is this kind of game done right. And I would absolutely play this anytime. Specifically, like if you said Sagrada or Role Player, I'm going to use Role Player all night, all day. But I do have both expansions for Role Player, and I'm really looking forward to throwing those into the game and seeing kind of what they add to it. I really do like Role Player by itself, but it is a very lightish, medium light game. So as a heavier gamer, I look forward to kind of throwing more stuff into it and seeing how crunchy it can get with the various expansions. I also recently got Role Player Adventures, which is a cooperative game that kind of uses elements of the Role Player system, but it's standalone, and it's a exploration, storytelling, cooperative game. And I'm really looking forward to playing that as well, but that is kind of a cousin to Role Player. It doesn't necessarily directly build onto it. And finally, I played Viscounts of the West Kingdom. Now, I played that one twice, actually, over the last couple weeks. I played it at a 3-player count, and then I taught it to my fiance, and we played it at 2. And I'm really digging Viscounts. And Viscounts is the final game in the Of the West Kingdom series, which followed the Of the North Sea trilogy. And I think, for me, I still haven't played Paladins yet. I think of the other games, Raiders of the North Sea, I think, remains my favorite. And then I'd probably put Explorers of the North Sea and Viscounts of the West Kingdom maybe tied below it. And then I think below that is Architects of the West Kingdom, which I don't love. I don't really like the capture mechanic in that game. And then below that is probably Shipwrights of the North Sea, which was their first game, their kind of simplest and their weakest, I think, in my opinion. That's the only game in the 2 trilogies that I think I'd be fine just removing from my collection. There's just not enough game in that game. Although I might remove Architects as well. It's okay, but I don't love that kind of central mechanic. Now, Viscounts has a lot of different things going on. There is a central rondel. So on their turn, players are going to be moving their Viscount around this board. Depending on whether they're in the outside circle or the inside circle, they'll be taking various actions. There's also a lot going on with cards. Players have a player board. They have 3 cards on the player board, and they'll be rotating those cards every turn. And based on what cards are there, that'll kind of determine how they can take certain actions, how powerfully, and what they can do. And there's also this very kind of interesting little double token system on the player board with Vice and Virtue. And as you do certain actions in the game, you'll be moving these Vice and Virtue markers. Eventually they'll collide. When they do, you'll get to do something. Hopefully you've really advanced the Virtue marker more than the Vice, so it'll be very positive for you. And then generally, it'll also have an effect for the other players in the game, and it'll be negative for them. But it also depends on kind of what cards they have. If they have criminals on their player board, it will probably be negative for them. And then there's also this system with debts and deeds in the game. When you get debts, they'll immediately be worth 2 negative victory points at the end of the game, but you'll have opportunities to flip those debts over, and when you do, you'll earn a resource, and the debt will no longer score negative victory points at the end of the game. Simultaneously, there are these deed cards, which are worth 1 victory point at the end of the game when you acquire it. But if you flip the deeds over, they're worth 3. And there's this little weird system between the debts and the deeds. So whichever card stack runs out will trigger the end of the game. And then it will also initiate an endgame scoring situation where the player that has the most cards flipped over of the other type will score a chunk of endgame victory points. I like the kind of interplay of mechanics in Viscounts, and I think it's one of those games where there's a lot of different ways to score points, and it's up to you to figure out what you're going to pursue in your game. I like the choices in the game, and I like the way that it provides different scoring systems, and I like those scoring systems. And I like the way you can choose between them or kind of choose which ones to invest in more in any given game. So Viscounts is a game that I would like to play more of, just like Alma Mater. They're both, I think, pretty solid 8s in my book. I may actually like Alma Mater more, but Alma Mater has that problem, I think, where it's really only going to play sweetly at that 4-player count. So those are the 5 games that I played this period, and now I'm going to talk to you about the single Kickstarter campaign that's going to complete funding during this coming week. And that single campaign is Borderlands, Mr. Torque's Arena of Badassery. Now, this is going to complete its funding on Thursday, December the 23rd, so it's Christmas Eve. They started the campaign with a minimum required funding goal of $80,000. They're currently at about $1.5 million, which is about 19 times that minimum required funding goal. Borderlands is a game for 1 to 5 players. It's going to play in about 45 to 90 minutes. At least a single scenario is. It looks to have a medium-heavy complexity, and we're going to set the risk level on this campaign at high because it's a publisher that really hasn't done too much before, and they've bitten off a big IP here, a big game with kind of lots of miniatures and stuff. So there's more risk than normal with a somewhat untested company doing this big production with lots of miniatures. Now, the game itself is based on the Borderlands video games, so it's a very popular IP. I think if you take a look at the campaign, or if you've looked at it already, I think it does a really good job of appealing to Borderlands fans and really kind of capturing that energy from those games with the art of those games. So it looks good. I mean, it looks accurate in what it's doing. Now, it's a little tougher to say, as a board gamer, how worthwhile this game is going to be. I've looked at the rule book. It's kind of what you'd expect in a situation like this, where you're going to have action points and you're going to be going around the board. You're going to be picking up loot, killing monsters, and you're going to have different kinds of actions that you can take. We also don't know what the scenarios are for this game. We know that it's a campaign. We know that there are going to be multiple scenarios. I think there's a base campaign that comes with the game, and then there is a booklet that has 2 more campaigns. But the question is, how many scenarios are in all of those campaigns? And I think ultimately, that's going to determine how good the game is. That's going to determine the replayability of the game. But that hasn't been revealed yet. So it's a little bit, blind. Now, I backed this originally myself. And I did that because there were some pre-order bonuses. So I wanted to get in for those in case I decided to back it. But I've been waffling a lot on this one personally, so I'm not sure if I'm going to back it or not. And part of that is because I just don't know the scenario content yet, and it's a relatively untested publisher. There's just a lot of question marks in the air for a campaign with a big price tag like this, and we'll get into that in a minute. But it also is a Borderlands game with miniatures, and it could be great. And it's a game, I think, more than even other games, everyone who potentially might own it needs to kind of look at this and decide for themselves. Because if you love Borderlands and you love that franchise and you have kind of a soft spot for it, you may be more able to enjoy this game even if there ends up being, some flaws in it. So there are 2 different designers who've worked on this. There's Justin Gibbs, who has previously worked on Darkness Comes Rattling, Malifaux 2nd Edition, and Puppet Wars Unstitched. And John Kowaleski, who's previously worked on Firefly the board game, Spartacus, A Game of Blood and Treachery, and Star Trek Ascendancy. And then there are a handful of artists. There's Mariah Bryant, who hasn't done anything before. There's Katie Dillon, who's previously worked on Sons of Anarchy, Men of Mayhem, Star Trek Ascendancy, and Tyrants of the Underdark. There's Sophie Engerman, who, again, this is her first published work. David Lanza has worked on Champions of Midgard, Hellboy the board game, and Rum and Bones Second Tide. And Elena Lorenzo, and this is her first published game. Finally, the publisher here is Monster Fight Club, and the only game that they've really published that's kind of been ranked on BGG is called Tentacle Town. So there are 3 different pledge levels I want to go over with you, and then we'll talk about the various add-ons, because you can get the kind of things that are in some of the higher pledge levels piecemeal if you just want some of them. So for $85, you can pledge for Arena Casualty. That is just the base game, nothing more. For $135, you can pledge as a True Badass. That is going to throw in the Skags at the Gate expansion and your access to applicable stretch goals. So in that first pledge, no stretch goals. And then finally, for $365, you can pledge at the Ultimate Vault Hunter level. And that is going to throw in a ton of extra stuff. You're still going to get these Skags at the Gate expansion and the stretch goals. In fact, you'll be getting more stretch goals because you'll also get the ones that apply to this pledge level. Plus, you'll be getting the Robot Revolution expansion, the Tink Camp expansion, the Best Minion Ever expansion, the Badassery Rex expansion, the Monster Fight Club Objective Pack, and the Monster Fight Club Obstacle Pack, the Borderlands Object Pack, and the Acrylic Token Pack. So all of those things in the Ultimate Vault Hunter pledge level. Now, if you wanted to buy any one of these things separately, here are the prices for things as add-ons. So the Badassery Rex expansion is going to cost $60 as an add-on. The Borderlands Object Pack is $30, and that has 19 different kind of miniature items, sort of things that you'd see around, almost like terrain. The Best Minion Ever expansion is $30. The Tink Camp expansion is also $30, and the Robot Revolution expansion is $45. Now, if you pledged within the first, I think, 72 hours, you got a Steve the Psycho character, kind of little mini add-on thing. That was why I originally pledged early, to make sure that if I was going to back this, I would get that for free. But if you pledge later, you're not getting it for free, but you can add it on for $10. There's also another little boss mini expansion. It's called the Ravenous Warble Gobbler. That's $20. And that, I think, was also free if people pledged early. So that's kind of $30 worth of stuff that you got for free if you pledged within the first 72 hours, I think it is, as an early bird. The Skags at the Gate expansion is $45. Although really, if you wanted that, then you should at least just pledge that second pledge level, where that's all you're getting with that anyway. You're getting the base game, Skags at the Gate expansion, and access to stretch goals. The Monster Fight Club Objective Pack is $30, as is the Obstacle Pack. And then there's a Loot Expansion Campaign Book for $10. Now, this thing was opened up as a stretch goal. So if you pledge at anything other than that base game pledge, you're going to be getting this anyway. You don't need to add it on. But you can if you're pledging at that first level. And that is the thing that's going to give you 2 more campaigns, although we don't know what the scenarios are that are going to be in those various campaigns, or how many scenarios in each campaign. Now, I should make note that if you were to add up the prices of all of those things, that's $365. And all of those prices are $5 to $10 under what they're going to be at retail. So if you discover this out in the wild at retail, that $365 is going to end up being more like $450. But let's look at that $365. That $365 is for all of those add-ons, which means that that's the same price that the Ultimate Vault Hunter pledge is. But with the Ultimate Vault Hunter pledge, you're also getting the base game essentially for free. And that's an $85 value. Actually, it'll probably be more than that at retail. So if you want most of those things, definitely do the Ultimate Vault Hunter pledge. It's going to get you everything plus the base game. Now, historically, I haven't included shipping prices in these videos because they're different for everybody. They're going to be different prices for different countries. Even if you're in the US, but you're not in the continental US, your shipping is going to be more, if you're in Puerto Rico, Alaska, or Hawaii. But just to kind of compare campaigns, one campaign to the next, I am just throwing out one shipping price, just so over time, people watching this have an idea if the shipping for one campaign is more expensive than other campaigns. And so the number I'm going to put out for this campaign is the continental US shipping price for the Ultimate Vault Hunter pledge. And that is a range. It is $33 to $38. Now, what that means is that if you're pledging that Ultimate Vault Hunter pledge, you're going to be looking at a total of about $403. It's a big price tag. I mean, there's a lot of game, we think, but we don't know how, many scenarios there are. There's some question marks here. So for me, I'd really been on the fence about whether to back this or not. I'm leaning towards just canceling the pledge. I think it's too much game and too much money for something that's got some question marks hanging out there. But I may be making the wrong decision. and this could be a great game. So I still think it's something that you should look at and make a decision for yourself, especially if you like, miniatures games and these kinds of exploration combat games, and if you like the Borderlands IP. Finally, the publisher here, Monster Fight Club, is planning on delivering this Borderlands Kickstarter in November of 2022. So that wraps up the currently running Kickstarters this period. There was only one. I also only backed one game from last period. If you watched last week's video, I covered two games that were currently running the previous week, Pathfinder Arena and Weather Machine. And the game that I backed was Weather Machine, which shouldn't be much of a surprise to anybody who watches my videos, who's seen a bunch of them, because they probably know that Vital Lacerda is probably my favorite designer. And Weather Machine is his new game. It looks really good. It looks like it's probably going to be in his top few games. So I'm very excited about Weather Machine. I can't wait. It was an insta-back for me, and I'm super, super excited for it. That brings us to the games that I've acquired this period, and there were a lot. I had a lot of things kind of coming in. There were holiday sales. TMG is doing a liquidation sale because unfortunately they're going out of business. So I just was acquiring a lot of stuff. This is not a pace that I think will be kept up at all. In fact, I imagine that the retail stuff that I get in the beginning of 2022 is going to be very, very small. But here are the games that I acquired in the last week. First up is Cat Lady Box of Treats. I got one package that largely had a lot of little tiny kind of expansions, mini expansions. And this was one of them. Cat Lady is one of my favorite light games. It's a very light game. It's a card drafting set collection game, and it's just so well designed. It's phenomenal. I would recommend it to anyone. And I like it so much. There's a little expansion that came out last year. I figured I would pick it up. I've also played this game called Dokmus once before with a friend at a meetup, and it was on an extreme sale. I think you were able to get the game and its expansion both for $15. So I bought Dokmus and the expansion Dokmus Return of Erefel. And for a long time, I've been debating on whether to sell off Elder Sign or not. I tend to like Cthulhu themes. The problem with Elder Sign is it's kind of Cthulhu Yahtzee. So you're rolling dice, but how well you do is going to really depend on how you roll. And a lot of gamers don't like that. They don't like everything to kind of be decided by dice rolls. Now, there's some mitigation in the game. There's choices that can be made, but it's still a Cthulhu game, so it's intended to be difficult. But I long considered getting Elder Sign Unseen Forces. I decided to pick it up as an expansion. I'm sure I'll play Elder Sign a few times with Unseen Forces. I'll see where I'm at with Elder Sign as a game overall and with the expansion, and then I'll either probably buy some more expansions for it or just remove the whole thing from my collection. We'll see. But I really did enjoy Elder Sign. I think it was one of the first two games I actually bought in modern gaming. I think I bought Elder Sign and Catan at the same time. So there's a little bit of nostalgia for me in wanting to get the first expansion for it and try it out and see how it plays. So that was added to my collection as well. I also picked up a tiny little mini expansion for Fort called Fort Cats and Dogs Expansion. I like Fort a lot. It's a lighter game. It's a card game. There's kind of some resources in it. It's got a heavy amount of take that. You can steal other players' cards and stuff. It's great. But you do need to play it with the right group, because if you have players who don't like take that, it's going to be really contentious. But I think it's a great game. It's really well designed. Kyle Farron did the art, the same guy who does the art for Root. It's also published by the same publisher, Leader Games. So I figured I like Fort. Let's throw in the expansion. Then I had a Kickstarter arrive. It's called In Too Deep. I did already punch it. I haven't had a chance to play it, but thematically it has to do with, I guess, in kind of a cyberpunky future. There is this sort of covert ops team. Police don't know about them, and they're using psychic links to control criminals. So you're doing things on the board based on how you hook into minds of criminals. And the mechanics in the game look really kind of fascinating to me. It looks really fun. It's just mechanically got kind of different things going on than a lot of other games. It seems very unique. So I'm looking forward to getting that played and hopefully doing a first impressions video on that. Probably won't get that published until January at this point, but I think that's fine. Then, as I mentioned at the top of this video, I did add the expansion to Nidavellir called Thingvellir. So I'll play Nidavellir again. I'll throw that into the game. I'll see how it works. And ultimately, I'll make a decision on whether I'm keeping Nidavellir with its expansion or getting rid of the whole thing. I will say the cool thing about Nidavellir is the box is pretty big and it's this card trading game. And so all the components fit into the box, leaving a lot of extra space. I was able to take the small Thingvellir box and actually put it inside the Nidavellir box, and it fit without any problems. So storage-wise, it's great to get an expansion and have it not take up more shelf space. I also picked up kind of 3 linked games. It's the base game and 2 expansions. And this is a game that I've been wanting for a long time because it is an amazing game. It's one of my favorite games, probably. But I know that there is a deluxe version out there. The Kickstarter for it was kind of before my time on Kickstarter, so I wasn't able to get it that way. But there hasn't been a way to get this deluxeified version since. It's impossible to find. It's now being kind of published by a new publisher, and I just decided to suck it up and get the non-deluxeified version. So that is Orléans and its 2 expansions, Orléans Invasion and Orléans Trade and Intrigue. So at some point I'm going to do a deep dive into Orléans, and I'll probably do a video that talks about the base game and both expansions. It's not something I'm going to be getting to anytime soon, and Orléans is an older game at this point, so it's not something I would be doing a first impressions video for. So I have it in my collection now. I can play it, and eventually I'll do a video on it, but it's not going to be getting probably played or having content made on it anytime soon. But it is a game that I would really recommend to almost anyone. It kind of sits in that space to me that like Concordia does, where I think it just plays well to all levels of gamer. The one thing you probably should know about it is that it's a bag builder, so hopefully you like that. Another bag builder out there is Quacks of Quedlinburg, but Quacks of Quedlinburg is a very light bag builder that has a lot of luck involved in it, and there's kind of a press your luck element. Orléans is a bag builder, but it's more of a heavy Euro in the way its mechanics work. So, you've got one really good bag builder for the light crowd, and then Orléans for the heavier crowd. But I don't think Orléans is a really heavy game. I think it's more of this kind of medium weight game that most gamers can enjoy. I also picked up Pioneer Days because it was published by TMG, who just went out of business and they were doing liquidation sales. So it was kind of my last chance probably to pick up that game. It's not a super popular game, so I don't know if other publishers are going to be rushing to reprint it anytime soon. Some of TMG's catalog, like I think Orléans was originally published by TMG, but some of TMG's catalog I think are games that probably other publishers will pick up. Pioneer Games isn't a game that's super in demand. It kind of plays like Oregon Trail, the card game, where you're out there in the Old West, you're trying to take care of your people and kind of settle and do things as pioneers do things, but it can be brutal at times. It's not as brutal as the video game where you can kind of just instantly die, and it's not as brutal as the Oregon Trail card game, which is so brutal that it's stupid. You could literally play one card and die in Oregon Trail, the card game. I wouldn't recommend anyone get that. But this is like a version of Oregon Trail, the card game, that's actually a good game that plays well from everything I've seen about it. So I picked it up. I figured it was probably my last chance to get this game, at least a new copy of the game. And it may be a game that I want in my collection for the long term. So now I have the ability to make that decision. A couple years ago, I backed a Kickstarter called Pipeline by Ryan Courtney, which was a heavy Euro combined with a polyomino game. So players are kind of creating this grid of polyominoes into like a pipe network, and then they're also going on a board and taking actions, and it's an economic game. There's a lot of stuff happening in Pipeline. I really, really like it. It also has art by Ian O'Toole, who's one of my favorite artists in all of board gaming. So they just did an expansion for it. It's called Pipeline Emerging Markets, but it is not an expansion that went through Kickstarter. So the expansion just went straight to retail. So I pre-ordered it. It finally showed up with a couple other games that I'd also ordered. One of those games was the Tuscany Essential Edition. I had recently picked up the Viticulture Essential Edition. That is a game I love, but I did not have my own copy, so I finally picked it up on a sale. And then I used the Tuscany Essential Edition, which I knew I wouldn't need immediately. I knew I wasn't going to get Viticulture played anytime soon because I'm just busy with playing games for videos. So I put Tuscany in with the pre-order for Pipeline to help fill out the cart so I could get free shipping. But that finally arrived as well. And as most people know, if you're playing Viticulture, you really want to play with Tuscany. It just kind of makes the game that much better. Some people won't play without it. The other game that I picked up was Unfathomable, which is the new kind of variant, reskin of Battlestar Galactica, which I have played before, and I actually did not love Battlestar Galactica, but this one has a Cthulhu theme. I think I'm alone in really not loving Battlestar Galactica, but it's hard to play that game. It's very out of print. You have to find people that have it, and I've seen that game go for $200 for the base game, $200 for each of its expansions, so $800 kind of for the whole thing for Battlestar Galactica. So I wasn't planning on getting a copy for myself anytime soon. But when they made Unfathomable, it's from Fantasy Flight Games, they kind of reskinned it with a Cthulhu theme. It's just one box. It's more affordable. It's a theme that I like more, even though I was a fan of the Battlestar Galactica TV show. I figured I'd get this version and give it a try. I have not had a chance to play it yet. I look forward to it, though, a lot. And the final game that I acquired this period was, again, to round out my cart, but this time as I was buying things for my fiance for Christmas from Target. So I needed something to fill out the cart, and I looked around and I decided to grab the Wingspan Oceania expansion, which I'd actually been having quite a bit of trouble finding at gaming stores, so I got it through Target. We actually do have the previous expansion for Wingspan, but we've only played the base game, so I think now we need to try, each expansion, maybe both together if they play together. I'm not sure if you want to use both expansions in Wingspan or just kind of pick one, but we'll see. But I love Wingspan. I think it's a fantastic, amazing game that, again, kind of sits in this area where lighter gamers and heavier gamers can both play it and really enjoy it. Wingspan's so popular, though, that there has been a little bit of blowback. It has gotten some negativity, undeserved in my opinion. But at the end of the day, not everyone's going to like every game. And it's unrealistic to think that everyone will love every game. So you could pick any game. There's going to be people who won't like it for whatever reason. I mean, you cannot appeal to everyone all the time. So even though I love Wingspan and I would recommend it to most people, there still are going to be some people out there who don't like it for whatever reasons. Maybe they don't like the card drafting. Maybe they don't like the way the cards kind of work or whatever. But in my opinion, I think Wingspan is a fantastic game that I would recommend to almost anyone. So that brings us to the end of this video, really. I'm going to do a quick what's coming section after the jump here. And I'm going to quickly talk about some changes and some things happening in the next year in the channel. First of all, I said I was going to keep track of this. Last week I had 17 2020 games left to play. This week we're down to 15. So as soon as I get these 15 games played, I'll be doing my top probably 30 games of 2020. It's coming a year after the fact, but it's coming, and I'm looking forward to it. I played a lot of good games in 2020, and I have a lot of really good recommendations for you guys. Now, before I talk more about video series and lists and things, which is something I'm going to come back to, as far as the first impressions videos go, I kind of did an update last week about everything that I was wanting to work on. That hasn't really changed. I wasn't able to get those videos produced this week because of the booster shot I mentioned at the top of this video. and kind of just other seasonal things. So everything that I talked about in last week's video about the kind of slate for first impressions video, that's remaining true, and it's kind of just moving from this week to next week. So those are the same videos that I'll be focusing on. Now, my plan was, in terms of kind of some other video series that I wanted to do, the first thing I was going to do was going to be that top 30 games of 2020. However, while I was recovering from getting boosted, I was looking at all of the games coming out next year. And so I think the first thing I'm going to produce is a series of videos talking about all of the games coming out next year. I mean, not all of them, but the top 120 of them, in my opinion. So I think I will be doing that probably over the next week or two. And as I'm making those videos, I'll be balancing them out with first impressions videos. I think over the next 6 weeks or so, I'm going to need less time spent on the website, and I'll have less new games delivering, kind of necessitating new first impressions videos. So I'll be doing catch up on the older ones, the ones that I want to get completed. And I think I'm going to be working in this series looking at games coming out in 2022. So I'm very excited about it. I think I'm going to have lots of really useful content for you guys. So I'm planning on doing that series. Then I'll move forward to the top games of 2020. Once I'm done with that, I will be doing my top X number of games of all time, and I'm looking at probably doing my top 300, which is going to be a pretty big list. My friend Ryan is going to join me for maybe the top 50. So I'll kind of do a series of videos, and then once I hit the top 50, he'll join me, and that'll be fun because we'll be able to react to each other's choices and kind of speak to what the other person thinks are the best 50 games. Once I've finished with that, I should be ready to do my top 20 to 30 games of 2021. Now, in amongst those kind of 4 series of videos, somewhere in there, probably near the end of them, I will also be launching a Patreon. And then later in the year, and this is something that I really, really want to get to, I will be launching a Twitch channel. And I'm very excited about that. I have a lot of kind of campaign games. I would like to feature those on that Twitch channel. We'll be playing through, various campaign games. I'll also be doing Euros and stuff. I'll have different days for different things. Before we launch the Twitch channel, though, something else that I'm going to be doing on this channel is I have an upstairs bedroom with a lot of games in it, and it looks really good. It's a much better place to shoot than here. I need to spend more time kind of cleaning it up, get a couple more shelves, get everything organized, but eventually that's going to be my new studio space, and it's going to look great. So at some point, I'll be moving into that space. I also plan on getting new camera equipment, more lighting. To date, I've just been shooting this on a Samsung phone, and I've been using just kind of like ambient light. There's a lot of light down here where I am. I can throw on a couple other lights and cheat it as best I can. But when I go upstairs, there's going to be a huge jump in quality. The space is going to look better. I'm going to get some cameras and lighting equipment and just take it to the next level. And then as we eventually launch the Twitch channel, we'll also need to get more equipment for that, including maybe some kind of a stream deck and multiple cameras. So all of those things are going to be happening over the next year. I will continue to do the Kickstarter weekly every week. I will continue to do the Game of the Month video once a month, and I plan on getting caught up with that. I'm kind of 1 month behind, but I'll be getting caught up with that as we go into the new year. So those videos should be coming out timely moving forward. Then I will also be getting caught up on my first impressions videos, and as we go into the next year, you'll probably see maybe 1 or 2 first impressions videos from me per week, just based on new Kickstarters that deliver or new spanking brand new games they get from retail only. And as I kind of, have less first impressions videos to do, you're going to start to see more full teach and review videos from me. So all of those things will be happening along with the eventual launch of the Twitch channel. So that's what's coming next week and in 2022. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and be watching over the next couple of weeks. If you have some time off, or you're kind of off school, or you've taken a vacation over the holidays, I should have a lot of videos actually coming out in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And keep an eye out for my top 12 videos of games publishing in 2022. I think there's going to be a lot of cool content in those videos, and they will be coming out probably starting this week and next. Take care, have a great holiday season, play lots of games, and I will see you very soon.